The wind blew dry dust across the empty road. 3 alien women walked with slow slosh heavy steps. Their robes were torn. Their feet cracked from long walking, each carried a child small. Thin and too weak to cry anymore, their planet had fallen. In the war, their mates had died, their homes burned. Now they were widows, alone. Walking through a human settlement where no one wanted them, the first widow, taller than the rest, had blue-gray skin and sharp silver eyes. She once ran a library. In her city, now she held her son in one arm and an empty water pouch in the other. The second widow, the youngest, was missing fingers on one hand from a factory explosion. She kept pressing a cloth against her baby's lips, hoping for one last drop of milk. The third widow was the quietest, oldest, and carried twin girls, who hadn't opened their eyes in days. Her tail dragged behind her like it weighed 1,000 stones. They knocked on the first door. A bakery filled with the smell of warm bread. "Please," said the tall one. "We don't ask for money. Only work, anything." The baker looked at them, then at the children, then turned away. "We don't hire your kind," he said, and closed the door. The next stop was a workshop, sparks flying from metal as humans fixed old machines can. "We sweep, carry, clean." The young widow asked, her voice shaking. A worker laughed. "You think we'd trust aliens with tools?" "Get lost." She turned away, holding her baby close, trying not to cry. Hours passed. They went to farms, shops, even the recycling depot. Each time they were turned away, some laughed. Some shouted, most just ignored them. One woman at the orphanage said, "Go back where you came from," and slammed the gate. But there was no back to go to, only ruins and silence as the sun dipped lower. They found a quiet place near a broken fence. They sat in the dirt, too tired to walk, too hungry to speak. The children whimpered, then fell asleep from exhaustion. The widows sat in silence, watching the humans pass them like ghosts. Then, from the corner of the road, someone was watching. An old man, wearing dusty clothes and a wide hat, leaned on a metal cane. His skin was dark from sun, and his hands rough from years of work. He didn't speak at first, just watched them, eyes narrowed. Finally, he walked over and stood a few feet away. "You're not beggars," he said, voice low but clear. The tall widow stood, shoulders shaking. "No, we are workers," she whispered. The man looked at the children, then at their tired mothers. "You got names?" he asked. The oldest widow nodded. "I am Sila. She is Maru." She pointed to the young one. "And this is Vila." The man nodded slowly. "You're strong to come this far," he said. "This land doesn't like strangers, even if they're kind." "We're not looking for kindness," Sila said. "Only a chance." He looked up at the sky. Then back at them. "My farm's broken," he said. "No workers, no machines, barely any crops." He looked them in the eye. "But if you want to work, I've got dirt to dig, fences to fix, and animals too old to fight." Maru stepped forward. "We can do that." "You won't get paid," he warned. "Just food, shelter, and quiet." The 3 widows exchanged glances. They had no gold, no weapons, no friends, only children who still breathed. Sila stepped forward and said, "We accept." The man nodded and turned. "Come on then." As they followed him, the people in the town stared. Some whispered, some spat, but none stepped in their way. For the first time in weeks, the widows walked toward something instead of away. The path to the man's farm was rocky, but their steps were steadier now. The sky turned purple as evening came, stars blinking awake above them. When they reached the farm, it was just as he said, fences falling, fields full of weeds, water pump broken, animals too thin to bark. But to the widows, it was more than a farm. It was a beginning. That night, they slept in a dusty barn, all 6 children between them. The wind still howled outside, but inside, It was quiet. Vela looked up at the wooden beams, whispered a small prayer. The old man sat by the window, polishing an old tool. He looked out across his land, then at the barn. He didn't smile, but he didn't feel alone anymore. Tomorrow, the work would begin, and maybe just maybe something new would grow in the dust. The sky turned pale blue as the sun rose. The widows were already awake. Sela stood at the edge of the field, her feet in the cold morning dirt. She breathed in deep, smelling dust, old wheat, and the faint scent of hope. Behind her, Maru cleaned the barn floor with a broken broom. Vela sorted through a pile of old tools near the shed, her burned fingers moving slowly but with purpose. The old man, whose name was Harvin, stood watching. From the porch, he didn't give orders, not yet. He wanted to see what they would do without being told, and they didn't wait. They moved like people who had lost everything and didn't want to lose more. The farm was broken in every way. The water pump was cracked, rust climbing up its sides like a sickness. The fence was missing whole panels, and the wind carried dry leaves straight through the holes. There were only 3 animals left: an old mule, a blind dog, and a chicken with half her feathers. But still, it was more than the widows had yesterday, and that was enough. Sela found a bent shovel and began to dig out the roots choking the field. Her muscles ached, but she didn't stop. Each scoop of dirt was like scraping pain off her chest. She remembered her old home, her mate, the warm sun through glass windows. But that life was gone, and this one was hers now. Maru used a rusted bucket to carry water from the nearby ditch to the barn. The water was muddy, but the animals drank it like it was gold. She whispered soft words to the mule, who flicked its ears and leaned into her touch. Back in the city, Maru had cried every night. Now her hands were dirty, her back sore, and her tears were drying. Vela didn't speak much, but she moved with careful purpose. She tied old wires around broken wood, sealed gaps in the walls with cloth from her own robe. When her hands bled, she wrapped them in leaves and kept working. Her twin daughters played nearby with straw dolls, giggling for the first time in days. Harvin watched them all, something stirring in his chest. He hadn't heard children's laughter on his land in 10 years. Not since the war took his son and burned the fields black. He had closed himself off, lived in silence, let the land rot with his heart. But now there was noise again, quiet, honest noise. At midday, Harvin brought out stale bread and dried apples. The widows bowed their heads before eating. Even the children shared without fighting. They didn't ask for more, didn't complain that silence spoke louder than any words. These were not beggars, he thought. They were survivors. Later, Sela came to him with a broken pump pipe in her hands. "We need to fix this, or the crops won't grow," she said. Harvin blinked, then nodded. He hadn't thought of planting anything this year. But now, her words made him think of green. Again, together, they worked in the fading light. He showed her the old water filters. She showed him how her people used sand and stone to purify it. Their hands moved in rhythm, one human, one alien, side by side, without hate, without fear. That night Harvin lit a fire outside the barn. The widows and children sat around it, quiet but not afraid. The stars above were bright. More than any night before, Maru hummed a lullaby in her native tongue, and the children leaned into their mothers. Harvin sat on a wooden crate, a mug of warm tea in his hand. He didn't sing, didn't speak, but he stayed in the shadows. The blind dog curled beside Sila's boy. The chicken hopped onto Vila's lap, and she smiled without showing teeth. A soft wind moved through the broken fence, but no one shivered. There was peace here, even if it was fragile, even if it was small. Tomorrow would bring more work, more pain, but tonight they had fire, bread, and a little hope. And that was more than enough to survive. Harvin looked at the barn, the widows, the stars. He didn't say it out loud, but the words burned in his chest like coals. This land isn't forgotten anymore. Rain came without warning. Dark clouds rolled over the sky, covering the sun like a blanket of smoke. Thunder cracked in the distance, and the first drops hit the dry land with sharp taps. For a moment, it felt like a blessing, but too much rain, too fast, could destroy everything. Sila ran to cover the seedlings they had planted just a few days ago. Maru rushed to pull the children inside the barn. Vela shouted for help as the water pump overflowed, spilling muddy water into the storage shed. Harvin came out carrying old plastic sheets. Together, they tried to save what they could. But the storm didn't stop. The lower fields flooded. The few healthy crops bent under the weight of the rain, drowning in dirty pools. Their food, what little they had grown, was washing away. And with it, their hope. That night, the barn was cold. The firewood was soaked, and the wind howled through the cracks in the walls. The children shivered under wet blankets. Vila pressed her back against the door to stop the wind, but her arms were weak. Harvin looked around and said nothing, but deep in his chest, guilt burned. In the morning, everything was wet and broken. The ground had turned to thick mud, sticky and cold. The animals stood in silence, too tired to move. The food storage had collapsed during the night. Sacks of grain were soaked, now rotting. There would be no harvest. Harvin walked slowly to the truck. Hadn't moved in weeks, but he wiped the windshield and checked the engine. It roared to life, coughing like an old man waking up. He turned to Sila and said, "I'll go to town, bring back medicine, food, anything I can get." She nodded, eyes hollow, lips tight. "Be careful," she whispered. The drive to town was long. The roads were muddy, and the tires slipped often when he arrived. The market was alive with noise, humans shouting prices, selling dry goods, tools, clean water. Harvin approached a stall and picked up a bag of rice. The seller looked at him and said, "You feeding your new alien family?" Harvin didn't answer. The man laughed. "They'll suck your land dry." "Old man." Harvin dropped the rice, turned, and walked to the next stall. There, he found a young woman selling medicines, simple herbs, bandages, and nutrient packs. He picked up a few items, laid down the last of his credits. As she handed him the bag, a voice called out, "You again?" A soldier stepped forward, face hard and full of old hate. "You're the one harboring those creatures," he said. "Didn't learn your lesson." Harvin stayed quiet, his hands clenched. "They're not enemies," he said calmly. "They're widows with children, same as any war leaves behind." The soldiers stepped closer. "They're not your kind." Harvin's voice dropped lower. "Kindness doesn't need a kind." The soldier pushed him. The medicine fell into the mud. People turned to watch, whispering, some smiling. Harvin's fist moved fast. He hit the soldier once, hard, and the man fell back. Stunned, blood ran from the soldier's nose. Harvin picked up the medicine and walked away. No one stopped him, not this time. When he returned to the farm, the children were pale. One girl, barely breathing, Sila, took the medicine without a word and went to work. She crushed herbs, warmed water, and pressed cloth to the child's chest. By nightfall, the girl's eyes opened, weak but alive. Sila cried silently. Holding her close, Maru hugged her from behind. Trembling, Harvin stood outside, the wind brushing against him like soft fingers. That night, something changed. They didn't talk about it, but it was there. Harvin was no longer just a man helping strangers, and the widows were no longer just guests in his barn. They were family-tied, not by blood, but by survival, by shared storms, shared hunger, and a promise. No one would be left behind. Not again. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky was clear again, filled with stars. Harvin looked up and whispered something to the dark. Maybe to his lost son, maybe to the universe. Still here, he said, and inside, so were they. The morning was quiet. Too quiet, even the animals were still, as if something was waiting in the wind. Harvin stepped out of the house and noticed the smell first. Burnt wood, sharp and bitter. Then he saw the smoke rising from the front gate. The wooden frame that marked the entrance to the farm was blackened. Still warm, the edges glowing softly. Scrawled in thick black paint across the burned gate were 3 hateful words. Aliens out. Harvin's jaw tightened. He didn't speak. Just walked toward it with a bucket of water. The children stayed inside the barn, eyes wide, hands shaking. Seela stood beside him, watching the flames die. Her hands were steady, her voice low. This was no accident, she said. Maru came running from the field, Vila close behind her. They stared at the scorched gate, then at each other. They didn't ask who had done it. They already knew. Someone. In the town, someone who hated what they were building here. Someone afraid of the change, but the farm would not stop. Seela picked up a hammer and began fixing the broken boards. Maru helped carry more water, and Vila patched the fence beside the gate. The message was clear, but so was their answer. They would not leave. That night, Harvin brought out his old rifle. It hadn't been used in years, but he cleaned it, oiled it, and placed it beside his door. The children were afraid. But Harvin knelt down and said, "This is only to protect you." His voice was calm, steady, like stone warmed by fire. At midnight, the wind picked up again. Then came the sound of footsteps, heavy, running. Then a crashing noise, and fire lit up the sky again. This time, it wasn't just the gate. The side barn was burning. Harvin rushed out with a bucket, shouting. The widows followed him with blankets soaked in water. Seela grabbed a shovel and beat the flames back from the chicken coop. Maru formed a line with the children, passing buckets from the well. Vila, her hands still healing, climbed to the roof of the barn to tear off burning straw. The fire hissed and screamed. But together, they fought it back, inch by inch, breath by breath. Smoke filled the air, thick and choking. One of the younger children passed out from the heat. Harvin carried her to safety, eyes red, lungs burning. By morning, the fire was out. The barn was damaged, but it still stood. The fields were covered in ash. But the crops had survived. No one spoke. They sat together in the dirt, watching the sun rise through the smoke. Sila's arm was burned, blisters forming across her skin. Vila's hair was singed. Aru's lips cracked from smoke. Harvin's hands shook slightly, but he hid it from them. They had survived again, but something had to change. That day, Harvin hitched the mule to the old cart. He wore his cleanest clothes, ironed with care. He placed his rifle inside a cloth bag, not to use, but to remind. The widows didn't stop him. They just nodded. Harvin drove into town alone. The streets were busy, people trading, laughing, pretending not to know what had happened. He stopped in front of the town square and rang the old farm bell that hung there. It hadn't rung since the war, but today it echoed like thunder. One by one, the townspeople came, curious and annoyed. Harvin stood on the cart and raised his voice. "Someone tried to burn my farm last night," he said. "Someone tried to hurt women and children, and that someone is a coward." Gasps, murmurs. Then silence. He continued. "These alien widows you fear, they work harder than anyone here. They feed my animals, clean my land, fix my tools, and ask for nothing but peace." He looked around slowly. "You don't have to help them," he said. "But don't you dare hurt them." The crowd didn't cheer. But they didn't walk away either. Some looked down, ashamed. Others crossed their arms, thinking. One old woman stepped forward and asked, "Why risk everything for them?" Harvin looked at her and said, because no one else would. He turned the cart around and drove home. The wind in his hair, the road soft under the wheels. When he returned, Sela met him at the gate with a fresh cloth for his brow. "You didn't have to fight for us," she said quietly. "I didn't fight for you," he replied. "I fought for what's right." That evening, someone left a bag of clean seeds at the gate. Note, no name. Just a silent message. Not everyone in the town wanted them gone, and maybe, just maybe, change had begun. The ash from the fire still covered the earth like a gray blanket. But underneath, life had not given up. Tiny green shoots pushed through the dirt, stubborn and silent. And on that quiet morning, Harvin knelt beside one of them, touching the leaf like it was made of gold. The widows worked harder than ever. Sela planted new rows with steady hands, sweat rolling down her back as the sun rose. Maru sang softly as she cleaned the tools, her voice gentle, full of old lullabies. Vela repaired the water lines, her fingers still rough but faster now, steadier. Even the children helped carrying baskets, chasing away birds and fetching buckets of water. For weeks, no one from the town came, but every few days, something appeared at the edge of the fence. A bag of nails, a pair of gloves, a box of soap. No names, no notes, only small signs that maybe hearts were changing. The fields turned green. Again, the first sprouts of grain danced in the wind. The tomato vines stretched toward the sky, heavy with hope. And one day, Harvin stood beside a full crate of ripe vegetables. He stared at it for a long time before saying, "It's time," that evening. They set up a table near the gate. Vela wrote a small sign in both human and alien script. Food for sale, fresh. Honest, grown with care. They waited, not expecting much. But the first buyer came before the sun even set. It was a young girl, no older than 10. She held a single coin and asked for bread. Sela handed her a loaf, warm from the oven. The girl smiled, whispered thank you, and ran back to Wardtown. That night, more came, slowly, carefully, as if testing something new. Humans, once afraid or hateful, now stood in line for alien-grown food. The farm became more than a place to work. It became a symbol, a place, where past pain and future hope could grow side by side. Harvin built a small wooden table beneath the oldest tree. There, he taught the children numbers and letters. Maru added her alien words to the chalkboard. The human kids who visited the farm began repeating them with laughter. No one cared if a word was spoken in a different tongue. They just wanted to understand. Sela started painting again. She used crushed berries and flower petals to make color. She painted the barn doors with images of hands human and alien planting seeds together. Vela hung wind chimes made from broken tools, and their soft music danced across the fields. Even the old mule stood taller now, its steps less tired, its eyes brighter. But it wasn't just the farm that changed. The people in the town changed too. A human boy came one morning with his father's coat torn. Vela fixed it without asking for anything. A mother left eggs at the gate in return. One afternoon, the mayor arrived. He stood awkwardly at the fence, hat in hand. "I came to see the farm," he said. Harvin nodded and showed him around. The mayor said nothing until they stood beside the field of sunflowers. Then he whispered, "I never thought they'd grow again," Harvin replied. "They just needed someone to believe." In them, the harvest festival came in late summer. Tradition said it should be held in the town square, but this year it was different. People followed the scent of fresh bread, roasted vegetables, and fruit pies to the farm. They came in wagons, on bikes, some even on foot. They brought music, stories and laughter. Children ran through the fields, human and alien together. They played tag beneath the same sky. No one asked where they were from, only what game was next. That night, under lanterns hung between trees, Sela gave a small speech. Her voice trembled. But her words were strong. "This land saved us," she said. "Not because it was easy, but because we were not alone." Harvin raised a glass of fresh berry juice and said, "To the ones who stayed, to the ones who worked, and to the ones who never gave up," everyone drank together. The stars blinked down on the farm, the same stars that once watched pain and silence. Now watched joy and music. In one corner, Maru danced with her baby in her arms. Vila fixed a lantern that had gone dark, and it lit up again. Harvin sat on the porch, his old rifle now replaced with a basket of seeds beside him, and the wind whispered through the fields, carrying a single word from every voice: home. The joy of the harvest still echoed in the wind. But peace never lasted long in places where old hatred slept. It began with a letter nailed to the farm gate. The seal was military, the ink thick and red. Harvin tore it down and read it aloud with steady hands. "You are hereby ordered to appear before the Civil Unity Court in 1 week. Charges: harboring unauthorized non-citizens, disrupting human trade systems, and threat to local order." The widows froze. Sila's hand tightened around her child's shoulder. Vila looked down, her mouth a hard line. Maru's eyes filled with quiet fear. Harvin folded the letter, placed it in his pocket. "They're not taking this farm," he said. But inside, he felt the weight of every word. He knew the system. He had served it once, and now it was coming for him. News spread quickly. The town whispered again. Some said Harvin had gone too far. Others said he was a hero. But no one stood beside him. Not. Yet the day of the trial came fast. Harvin wore his clean shirt and old boots. The rifle stayed behind. Only the widows followed him to the courthouse. They wore simple robes, repaired with careful hands, their children walking quietly beside them. The courthouse was tall, gray, cold inside. The seats were full. Farmers, vendors, soldiers. Even the mayor Harvin stood in the center, alone at first. A voice echoed through the room. "Harvin Thorne, do you understand the charges against you?" "I do," he said. "Do you deny that you gave shelter to aliens without license?" "I do not." Gasps filled the room. He stood straight, unafraid. "I gave them shelter because they were starving," he said. "I gave them work because they asked for it. They are not a threat," he added. "They are the reason this town has food on its tables again." The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes, looked down from her seat. "The law is clear," she said. "This land is protected. Human first. Post-war protocol." Harvin nodded slowly. "And yet?" "The war is over," he said. "And what we do now defines peace." Silence held the room. Then, from the back, a voice broke it. "She saved my baby," a woman said, stepping forward. It was the young mother whose coat Vela had mended weeks ago. "She didn't ask for anything," the woman said. "She just helped." Then another. A baker, eyes wide, voice shaking. "They sell bread better than mine," he said with a nervous laugh. "I buy from them now, one by one." Others rose. Voices of those who had once watched in silence. Now speaking. "Their kids play with mine. They fixed my gate. They shared water when our well dried." Even the mayor stood, cleared his throat. "I opposed it at first," he admitted, "but what they built on that farm, it's something we should all learn from." The judge raised a hand, and the room quieted. She turned to Harvin. "Do you believe you are above the law?" "No," Harvin said softly, "but I believe the law was below what was right." The judge looked at the widows, then at the children who stood clutching their mother's robes. Then she looked at the people behind them, a crowd that was no longer angry, only awake. After a long pause, she said, "Case dismissed." The room didn't cheer, but a breath was released from every chest. Harvin didn't smile, but he nodded. In thanks, the widows lowered their heads, not in shame, but in respect. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying the sound of children laughing. The sun shone just a little warmer. A town that once turned its back had taken one step forward as they returned to the farm. Harvin looked over his shoulder at the courthouse. He knew it wouldn't be the last fight, but it had been a good one, and they had won it together when they reached the gate. Maru placed fresh flowers beside the burned spot from the fire weeks ago. Sila whispered a quiet prayer in her language. Vila, with soft eyes, handed Harvin a folded cloth. Inside was a patch she had sewn with her bruised hands. It read, "Justice grows where kindness is planted," and Harvin, for the first time in a long time, let himself smile. The sun rose slow and golden over the farm. The gate stood strong now, rebuilt with thick wood. Hand-painted by the children, across the top in bright red letters was a message they all helped write. All welcome, all worthy. It had been 1 year since the widows first arrived. 1 year since they walked the dust road with tired feet and silent children. The land they now stood on had changed. But more than the land, the people had changed. Harvin sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the youngest children chase chickens through the field. The sky was blue, the soil rich, the barn freshly painted. The old mule now had a new foal beside her, strong-legged and curious. The blind dog followed the twins everywhere, never leaving their side, inside the house. Vela baked soft rolls, filled with herbs and crushed nuts. Her hands, once burned and bandaged, now moved with ease and pride. Maru hung fresh clothes on the line, humming a song that echoed across the farm like sunlight. Sila taught numbers to the older kids under the shade of the old tree. The children repeated her words in both human and alien tongues, laughing at mistakes, helping each other. Visitors came often now, some to trade, some to learn, some just to sit in peace. There was no fence to keep them out, only a path lined with wildflowers. Once, the town feared this place. Now they sent gift seeds, blankets, paint, books, even music. One day, a boy from the town arrived with a paper in his hand. He gave it to Harvin and said, "The mayor asked me to deliver this." Harvin opened the letter slowly, reading each word twice. Then he looked up, eyes wide. "What is it?" Sila asked gently. Harvin smiled, the lines on his face softening. "They want to make the farm a teaching ground," he said. "A place to train others, to grow food and grow peace." The widows looked at each other, silent, then nodded. They understood what it meant. Their struggle had become a lesson. Their pain had grown into purpose. Weeks later, the mayor and other leaders visited the farm. They walked through the fields, touched the plants, listened to the children sing. They asked questions not about what the widows were, but about how they had done what others thought impossible. That night, a new celebration took place. Lanterns floated into the sky, glowing like stars that refused to stay distant. A stage was built from old wood, where Harvin, Sila, Maru, and Vila stood side by side. Not as farmer and widows, not as human and alien, but as builders of something new. Sila spoke first, her voice soft but strong. "We came here with nothing but our hands and our children." She said we were not given safety. We earned it. Maru stepped forward. "We were not given kindness. We planted it." Vila held up a small bundle of seeds, "and now we give it to others." Then Harvin spoke last. "I gave them shelter," he said, "but they gave me back my life." The crowd was quiet, listening deeply. Even the wind seemed to pause. Then, slowly, hands began to clap, one by one. The sound grew until it filled the night like a heartbeat. The farm became more than a home that year. It became a symbol across the region. People from far towns came to learn how to grow food without borders, how to build homes with hands that once knew war, how to raise children without fear of who they sat next to. The barn was turned into a community hall, the old storage room into a schoolhouse. Sila became a teacher, Maru a healer, Vila, an engineer. Harvin watched it all, quietly. Proudly, always with his hat low and his heart full. And every morning before the sun rose, he still walked the fields alone. He touched the leaves, whispered to the soil, and remembered what it once looked like. Empty, broken, forgotten. Now, it was alive. On the anniversary of the fire, they lit lanterns again, not to remember pain, but to honor what had grown from it. Children human and alien released the lights into the sky together. They laughed, pointed, clapped. Above them, the stars watched, and below. The home they had built together stood strong. They had not just survived, they had transformed. And in a world that once saw them as less, they had become more. Not because of weapons or gold or power, but because one human had listened, and 3 alien widows had dared to hope.